Begin the current Daf, Mesech Gitin Daf Pei. Begin 6 lines down from the top of the Yommi. We're in the middle of the Mishnah, which is discussing different psulim in a get. And the theme, which is for these Mishnayos, of, okay, so Teitzim is Emezeh, there's a whole bunch of different consequences that apply because it wasn't a valid get. And we continue with similar types of situations where we're going to say, okay, Teitzim is Emezeh, and all these things that we mentioned, that she doesn't get no ksuba, no peches, no mezainis, no blois, whatever, that's going to apply to different cases that we're going to be discussing in the next Mishnayos also. She's corresponds because the Cheskel turned to Daf Yomi. I'm joining for today's Daf. So discussing today's Daf are Tikinu Malchus Gitin, which we mentioned in the beginning part of the Mishnah, which was regarding that the institute that one should write the government that the get is taking place in. The halach of Teitzim Zemezeh, like we said, that because she thought she was divorced, albeit it was invalid, so she goes to marry another person, and they find out that it's invalid, she has to leave from both husbands. The Gemara discussed the principle of that, if even though it's technically a valid get, but if they change the text, the exact protocol that Chacham instituted, the child is going to be mamzer, even though it's not really something inherent for the validity of the get itself. Shina Shma Yishma, that we discussed on the top of this Amid, just a few lines before, that if they change his name or her name, places doesn't even mean change exactly the name, it means just from where the location is, that's where the name is. That's also a psul. Shemeres Yom Shezin, so the Gemara discussed regarding if we have a woman waiting for Yibum, that she was mezana, what's going to be her status in regards to her ability to marry the Yavam. And Kasav Get, B'Shaver, if the Sefer wrote a get and a receipt, and he gave it to the wrong ones. He gave the get to the woman, who then gave it to the husband. And they gave the receipt to the husband, who then gave it to the woman, and they end up with the wrong documents, what the halacha is going to be. To begin the current daf, we had mentioned in the Mishnah already that the Chacham established that Gitin should be dated to the ascension of the local monarchy in order to maintain peaceful relations. That they should say, oh, that we're significant, and they do it in our name. So the Mishnah said that if someone writes in Bavel, according to the present Roman monarchy, or for the Binyan Beis Hamikdash, or the Churban Beis Hamikdash, or they're in the east and they're right in the west, rest in the east, so that is going to be invalid for the yet, and therefore the Mishnah said Teitzim Mizeh Mizeh, V'tzuchi Get Mizeh Mizeh, and it's going to be even if she takes her ksuba from any of them, she has to give it back to them, and the vlad is going to be a mamzer. And then the Mishnah continued with Shina Shma Yushma, if they change his name or her name, or his town or her town, also Teitzim Mizeh Mizeh, V'chol HaDrachim Ha'elu Ba also applies to this halacha. Now our Mishnah continues 6 lines down at the top of the Amid on this theme about not being valid as a release of the woman, and hence when she marries someone else, it's going to have the same halacha, although it's really a different concept. Really, the Mishnah is going to say right now, but it has the same consequence of Teitzim Zemezeh, and therefore we're discussing that now. Says the Mishnah, Kol HaRayis, every erva, which as you can see over here, that we're showing an erva that sha'amru tzaresein mutaris, where you have a situation of two brothers that when one of them dies, so there's the halacha of yibum. So when one of them is an erva, the halacha is that the co-wife is also going to be permitted, because that's the opening Mishnah in Mesechtes Yavamis. It's a chamesh esrei nasim, that there's 15 women that are an erva to the brother-in-law, meaning to the husband's brother. That obviously there we said there's no yibum over there. Chacham said that tzarei their co-wives, are also permitted to marry someone else without chalitza when their husband dies without any children. So regarding such a situation, where if these co-wives of these arayis go, v'nisu, and they get married to someone else, which they're allowed to, because their co-wife is the brother-in-law's erva. So they're at Saras Erva. Saras Erva doesn't have Yibum Chalitza. She can marry whoever she wants when her husband dies without any children. But then what happens is, V'nimtzu Eilanis, then they find out, V'nimtzu Eilu, they find out that these Arayas, the co-wife, meaning not the Tzara, but the quote-unquote Erva, was Eilanis, was it was someone who can't have children. So it was revealed now. That means to say that the man their husband who died had been engaged to her erroneously. That's the halacha with anus. A person wants to have a woman who could have children. He didn't realize that. Comes out that these were not co-wives of an erva, and the erva meaning never exempted these women from chalitza. So now that she married another man, that was a yavam l'shuk. That was inappropriate because you weren't itzaras erva, because the erva really was an islandess. Oh, so you're going to say the same type of halacha. We're going to say that now that we find out, as this picture is illustrating, it's just a little bit graphic, so it's maybe a little complicated, but we say you generally put yourself saying, but then as the bottom graph is showing, if it turns out that she's an islandess, though she was this Sarah was never really married to Shimon, and comes out that this Rivka, who was a Tzara, got married to Maisha, was inappropriate because you weren't the Tzara Selva. So Allah is Teitze Mizeh Mizeh. Now, this Rivka in this picture on the bottom, she has to leave the husband Moshe that she got married to, and Mizeh, she also has to leave from the Yavam. And all these ways that we mentioned in the first part of the Mishnah on the Ayin Tesima Beis, that, like we said, she doesn't get Iksuba, doesn't get blois, doesn't get all these things. Now, the Gemara in Yavamis, the Tzadik Beis and Alf explains that this halacha is like Rabbi Kiva, who says there's a halacha of mamzer from Chiv Alavin, because one of the things we mentioned was that Havlad mamzer mizeh mizeh. Now, a Yavam Lashuk, when she married this Maisha, she wasn't an Eishes Ish. She was just waiting for Yibum. That's a negative prohibition only. It's not a Chi of Kalas. It's just a negative prohibition. Rabbi Kiva holds that if a prohibited marriage of just a negative prohibition consummates, the child is going to be a mamzer. So the Gemara in Yavama says that this halacha would be going like that of Rabbi Kiva. No, even if it is, but it's only but you're not a Eishes Ish. Even if there's a Zika over here, the Torah only prohibits you from a loisa say of lisi Eishes Hamesa Chutza. You can't just marry someone else out. So it's a chiv alavin. So everyone else holds that no, it has to be a chiv misa to be able to create a child of mamzer. And Kiva holds no, even chiv alav. So this to say that it has all the halachas of the previous categories of havlad mamzer mizeh mizeh must be going like Rabbi Kiva. Moreover, another similar type of a case says the Mishnah, kasab sefer get leish. If the scribe writes a get for the man. Oh no, I skipped a case. So hakainis is yivimta, another similar type of a case. If someone marries his yavama, v'holcha. Now this is also another yavamas type of a case. What happened is let's say a man's married to a few women. So in this case, we have Reuben and Shimon that are brothers, and he's married to Sarah and Rivka. Okay, now Sarah is not an erva. Not like the first case. But what happened was that Reuven did Yibum with Sarah. So the halacha is, now the co-wife could go marry someone else, because that's the halacha, that when the Yavam has bia with one of them, it lets all the other co-wives off the hook. But then, it turns out that this Sarah who he did Yibum with, again the islandess, but a different case. That was the Erva islandess that Erva was letting her off the hook. It turns out she was really an islandess. Here, it turns out, really what Reuven did Yibum with Sarah is not valid, because she wasn't Eishes Hames. She wasn't really the wife of the dead person, because there was also Kedusha Toys. Comes out that the co-wife was never exempted, and she got married Lashuk without Chalitza. So here also is going to have the same halacha. It's going to be Teitze Mizeh, this Rivka, who is married to Moshe, has to leave this current husband that she has. And Umizeh, she also has to leave from the Yavam, from this Ruvain. Again, similar like we said, when the Eishes Ish has relations with another man, she has to leave both of them. Here also she has to leave both of them. All the halachas apply. That the children are going to be mamzerim from either one of them. She doesn't get a ksuba. All these different halachas. The first one was so. Rivka's Tatsi because she.
We give her all the punishment. She should have waited and find
Right,
out for sure.
right.
Now, what about now Sarah that she's now with Reuben? She has to be also Tatsi. Does she lose hers?
Sarah doesn't have to really technically.
So we are not worried about we are punishing the tzura, but tzura herself we are not punishing.
No, that Sarah is the one we're punishing. Sarah didn't do anything wrong because Sarah was never married to the brother.
She was never married.
Because because Kedusha Tais. Now the Mishnah continues with another case, also just because it has the same consequences, even though these are very different cases. Kasav Sefer Get Le'ish. If the scribe writes a get to the man to use to divorce his wife, and at the same time, B'Shever Le'isha, what happens is that the woman, she hires the scribe to write a receipt so that she can give it to the husband, that when he pays her the ksuba, he's going to like, hey, I'll pay you the ksuba, but I need a receipt. So she's ready with the receipt. They both go to the sefer to have their documents ready. Then the scribe makes a mistake. When he gives them the documents, V'nasan get le'isha, he gives the get, it says the name on it, says Stinkovitz. He says, okay, this is, he gives the get to the woman. He mixes it up. He gives the receipt to the man, and then each one has what they have to give to the other one at the time of the get when they get in the ksuba. So they each give over the documents that they have, and she gets married, thinking that it's the get that her husband gave her, and he thinks that his wife gave him his receipt. Later time after they're moving out of the house and whatever, they're going through the documents a few weeks later. The husband realizes that he's holding on to the get, and because he was trying to produce his receipt, turns out he doesn't have a receipt. He has a get. And the woman sees she's holding on to a receipt. Halacha is Teitzim Mezemezah. The same halacha. She has to leave both her old husband and her new husband, because she obviously was being mezana all this time, because she wasn't really divorced, she never got a get, she got a receipt. And all these halachas apply. So we have a very interesting Mishnah with all these different types of cases, but they all have the same ramification. Now, Rabbi Lazar Omer, he just says regarding this last case, he says he differentiates. He says not so simple. He says, Imla alter yatza, if, the Gemara is going to explain what does it mean immediately, but if immediately they find this out, that they mixed up the documents, then you're right, it's not going to be a valid get, and she's got to get a new get. But imla achaz man yatza, but if they find this out at a later point in time, that she's holding on to the receipt and not the get, hadez a get, it will be a get. Why? Because lo kalamenim in the rishon, there's no rights for this first one, meaning not everything is like his words to believe him, that he's saying that, hey, I never give a get to my wife because look, I'm holding on to the get. To cause a loss to the rights of the second one who did marry her. What does that mean? So Rashi says, because we say that they made a kanunya, they made a trick. And after she got married, they swapped the documents and hey, I'm not married. Now, Taisa asks, he says, what type of kanunya is going on over here? There's no gain over here. This is the essence of a pay alpha manav. He says sometimes the husband doesn't really realize that he's not going to have to remarry her. He thinks okay, great, we'll just make believe you didn't realize. Hey, you never divorced. We could take you back. Let's go back to Hawaii. Let's go back to have good times, remember the good old times, So therefore, when it happens at a later point in time, he's not believed to do this. Maybe they switch the documents later on, and then it will not cause her to leave her second husband. Now, the Gemara asks, going back to the beginning of our Mishnah, which again, we had a long Mishnah, we had many different cases, they all had the same consequences, but going back to the Mishnah said that if you write it to a malchus she'ein hoigenes, that was the first case. We had many different cases of you wrote it not to the appropriate government that you're in right now. So some of the Bavel wrote according to the malchus she'ein hoigenes, so he said that, okay, you didn't write to the appropriate malchus, it's going to be possible. Says the Gemara, my malchus she'ein hoigenes, what's the government that's not appropriate? Says the Gemara, malchus haremiyim, it refers to the Roman monarchy. Why is it called an inappropriate monarchy? Because they don't have their own script, and they don't have their own language because it's from another language. It really was from the Greek or whatever it is that they inherited. So therefore, it's considered malchus again. It's of that of the Romans. Now, Amar Uli says, okay, why did they institute that there should be the government on the get? Says the Gemara, Mishum Shalom Malchus, because peace for the government. meaning that we should have peace with them, that they should say that we're significant in their eyes, that we write their documents in with meaning that the government should say that they write our government in their documents. Which Taisa explains that it's dafka by Gitin you have to be concerned with Mishal Malchus, because a divorce, that the separation of husband and wife, is a big thing, even the secular courts. So therefore, that's what they want to have, that the government should be written. All of the documents are not makbid if they write, in the United States or whatever. But when it comes to divorce, for those proceedings, we want to have that it should say that because it's a big thing. So Mishal Malchus, therefore the Gemara said that they instituted to write the government in the get. Right, so then it would be, you would write that of Rome, right? When in Rome, what? Yeah. It's just calling it out. That's not the reason. It sounds like it's just we're calling it Malchus, and again, it's because they don't really have their own Ksav and Lashon, so that's just the terminology we give for them. But it's in Bavel, and then you're writing. So, and that was actually the other cases we wrote. If you did Yavan, if you did Madai, if you did Olda, anything would be invalid. But first, the Gemara says, wait a second, Shalom Malchus because we want to have peace with the government. So you're telling me that Teitze Vavlad Mamzer, you have to leave her second husband, the child's going to be a Mamzer? Well, it's a regular full-fledged get because we just didn't write for peace of the government. And yes, Remei or Litamei. This anonymous Mishnah, which we generally say is Remei, and the Gemara later on says it's Remei, goes according to his reasoning. Because that Omer said, whoever changes from the specific text that the sage made by Gitin, Avlad Mamzer, child's going to be a Mamzer. We don't consider it as a valid get, and therefore it makes sense this halacha, even though it was just a tikkun of Shalom Malchus, they would make it a possible get. Now, one of the other cases was L'shum Malchus Yavan. If let's say we already said if you were in Babel and you wrote it in the Roman government, or you wrote it for that of Madai or of Yavan, it's going to be possible. Why do you have to say all these cases for? It's the same. Just say you have to say for the government that you're in. No, because the Yeshmin Malchus again, had we said that if you're in Babel and you're writing it how long the Roman government is around, Mishum de Malicha, because right now the Roman government is present. So therefore, if you're in Babel, your government that you're in will be upset and they'll be particular with us that why we writing that of the Roman government when you're in by the Babylonians, by the Persians. Now, Malchus Yavin, but if let's say a guy's going to write according to the Median or the Greek government, what was because that they're not around anymore, and therefore there wouldn't be any jealousy, and they wouldn't be upset. Because that the Mishnah says that if the guy's writing at L'shum Malchus Mother B'Yavan, is that he's counting for the counting of the government for when Mother started being a government in the days of Daryavish, or when they started being the Greeks to reign, but they're not around anymore. They're in the dust of the dustbins of history. So you would think that they wouldn't be concerned if you're writing from an antiquity. Now, now, if you would tell me that no, that it would be possible if you write Mother and Yavin, because ultimately they were a government, they were a kingdom, and therefore they're significant to say that maybe the king that you're in right now would be particular. Binyan Abai is, but regarding if you're counting from the years, because we're talking about dating over here of the government. If you're dating from the time of the building of the Beis Hamikdash, that was. There's no more Beis Hamikdash anymore. They're not going to be upset about it. And if we would say the case of from how many years from when the Beis Hamikdash was built, the army they're going to say no, they're recalling their own praise, and they'll be upset because they're recalling that your allegiance is not with our government. You're primarily foremost you care about that country and not about ours. But if you'd mention how many years it is from the destruction of the Beis Hamikdash, the tzaruhu, which is painful, I would say that they're not particular. We have to say all the cases that yes, Roman, Median, Greek, Binyan Bayis, Churban Bayis, all these cases, if you're not doing according to the local government, they're going to be upset, and therefore that would be a psul in the get. There would be Teitze Mizeh Mizeh Vlad Mamzer. Now, one of the cases the Mishnah described was Hayib Mizrach V'Kasa B'Mayr. If let's say they were in the east and they wrote it that the get was written in the west, that's also is going to be a psul. So, man, who are we talking about that was really in the east and they wrote in the west? Elim Abal, if it's the husband, meaning that he really lived in the east and is writing in the west. That's one of the previous cases the Mishnah already mentioned. They changed his name or her name, or the name of his city, the name of her city. If he lived in the east and you're writing in the west, well, that's the case of changing the place of where he lived. So El Lav rather says the Gemara must be talking about the sefer, talking about the scribe. meaning where the scribe is writing it, instead of writing where he wrote it in the east, they wrote that he wrote in the west, because like Rav said to his scribes, like Rav Huna said to his scribe, when you're sitting in Shile, write that it's taking place in Shile. Even though it was given over to Hini, which Tais explains that these two places were very close, even so, that you would say, okay, it's not such a concern, Tom's River, Lakewood, you know what I'm saying? No. Even so, write it, don't write that this get was where it was given to you. Write it where it was written. So when we're saying in east and west, we're talking about the sefer. Even that would be a psul if the sefer is not writing it where he's writing it. And if you're writing it in Hinoi, to write in the document, so Kesever, write inside of it Behine that it was written in Hine, even though the words were given over to you in Shili. So that's what we're saying. What particular is about the Sefer himself. Now, continuing with the theme of the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda Mashmul Gitin Daf says, Zu Divrei Meir. This that we spoke about in the Mishnah was like Remeir, that he says a get becomes possible because of Shalom Malchus. Like we said, because it's not like the Matbeya Shotava Chacham. But the sages, they actually say, no. And this is version number one. There's two versions of what this teaching of the Amayr is saying. They say, remember, Babasa explains that Santer is an elder that's appointed to be well versed in the mapping of the boundaries of the properties of every single person. So even if it was only written for the reign of this site planner of the city, she will be divorced. So although Rameir says you have to write according to the Roman government, wherever it is, the Babylon, wherever you are, you have to write that. Chum disagree. They say no. Even if a low-level official, you write according to how many years he's been in office. He's been 3 years in office. You write in the 3rd year of the office of Bob II, who's the site planner. Even that would be enough to be valid as a get. The Gemara brings a story. Who Gitin, there was a get to have a ksivbe l'shem istandara de Bashka. What's that? That's the governor of Bashkar, who was a servant of the king. And Shalacha Rav Nachman bar Rav Chizla kamed Rabba. He sent this question about the Rabba. He says, such a case, what would the halacha be in regards to, is this considered, for the according to the Malchus? Shalach sent him in this case of the governor, even May would agree there would be kosher, although he's the one who says it has to be according to the Malchus. My time, what's the reason? Because the governor is from that president. So it says the Gemara, so why is it different than the site planner who we said just before it may disagree, says it's going to be possible? No, Hasam Zilu Milsa. That's disgraceful that there's no more inferior, usually the most difficult people are the ones that are the ones on the bottom of that. They want to assert themselves. But that's a shame to the king that you're going to mention about, surely the secretary. She also works for the government. But you're leaving all the other mishalsim, the governor and the mayor, and you're saying, that assemblyman or whatever it is, someone very, very low on the totem pole. So therefore, that's Remeir says no, that wouldn't be Shalom Malchus because that's disgrace. But here, a governor is something very significant, and therefore we know governors are very powerful people, and it does represent the might of the kingdom. And therefore, Remeir himself would agree in the case of the governor, but yes, he disagrees regarding when you write a low-level official, then he would agree that's where he's disagreeing with the Chacham. That's one version of the Aval Chacham Omer. What is it that they disagree with Remeir? Another version, Amar Baba, Amar Avuna, Amar Rav, which is this is going back on this halacha of the way Rashi says on Shalom Malchus of the piece of the government. So he says Zu Divrei Meir again. That this halacha of our Mishnah was according to the words of Meir. The sages, they say, Havlad kosher. Actually, that it's going to be kosher because this whole matbeya that they made was only because of Shalom Malchus. So if you don't do it, you don't do it. You don't have Shalom Malchus, but that doesn't make it get possible. The child's going to be kosher. But the Chacham agreed to Meir. That if they change his name, her name, the name of his city, the name of our city, That Shavla and Mamzer, because that's a psul in the get itself. But regarding just not writing Shalom Malchus, that's not going to make us say that the child's going to be a Mamzer. And then Rav Ashi says, Avana Namatinina, he says, I mean, Tosa has all arichas that he disagrees, but that's the way Rashi explained the Gemara. There was two versions of this teaching of Shalom Malchus, of what the Chacham's opinion is. Rashi says, Avana Namatinina, we also learned in the Mishnah, like Rav, that Shina Shema Yerishma, if you change his name, or her name, Shem Ira, B'Shem Ira, name of his city, name of her city, Teitzim Zeh, they have to leave from either husband, and all these different ways that we said that she doesn't get exuberant, doesn't get a worn out garment, doesn't get redeemed, all these different things applied by this woman. So says the Gemara like this: Haman Ketanila. Who is saying this in the Mishnah? If it's Remeir, because like we said, the stamma of the Mishnah, the anonymous teachings were Remeir. So if you think that this case was also Remeir, then it should have been taught together with the halacha of when you change the name of the government, because it's one psul of not saying the exact text, Shetaba Chachamim. Why is it being taught independently of that halacha? Elishmam and the Rabbanon, that's not the Stam Mashnitin of Remeir. There, even this is going according to even the Rabbanon. That's why I said independent. So you see, like Rav, that the Chacham agree when it's Shem, Shmoi, or Irai, that then it's going to be possible. They only disagree regarding when you just don't write the Shalom of the Malchus. Now, the Mishnah said these complicating cases, but just those Yavamis ideas of Kol Arayah Sha'amru B'chulu. So he had said that if, let's say, you have an erva and you have a tzaras erva, and then, so they're allowed to get married to whoever they want to, and then you ultimately find out that the erva was nihilist, and then we said, okay. So then the halach is going to be, Teitzim Mizeh, she has to leave both of them. But the Gemara wants to make a diuk. The Gemara wants to make not even the primary thing of the case. The one thing you told me was that this Rivka, the Tzara, she got married to this Moshe. So he said, you got married to Moshe, and really turns out that Tzara was not an erva, you really were a Shemeres Yavam. You were really connected to Reuven. Now you got to leave both of them. But Nisu, the case was she got married to this Moshe. It sounds like Zinulai, but let's say she didn't get married to Moshe. She just had something on the side with Moshe. Then it sounds like she would not be forbidden to the Yavam. Because getting married is a little bit complicated, this case that we're about to say, and it's like a diuk we're making in the Mishnah. But when she gets married to Moshe is more severe. Why is that more severe? Because people might say, wait a second, I saw Rivka get married to Moshe. Must have been Reuven did chalitza to Rivka, and she got married to Moshe. Now, if she would go back to Reuven after this Moshe divorces her, it's going to appear like he's marrying his chalutza, which, I'll marry chalutza because that's lo yivna. Kivin shel lo bano shuv lo yivna. Once you do chalitza, you're not allowed to marry. She's actually almost maybe like a Eishes Ach back again. So it sounds like that this is only a problem because she married Moshe. If she was just mizana with Moshe, she'd be allowed to actually go back to this Reuven. Says the Gemara, shall we say this refutes Rav Nuna? Because Rav Nuna says, he says that actually if this Rivka was mizana with this Moshe, asugli avama, she forbidden to her yavam. But the diuk, the inference of the words of our Mishnah says she married Moshe, sounds like only because of marriage, because of what we just described, as the Gemara will also detail in a second. But that would refute Rav Nuna. Says the Gemara, no, it's not true. Don't worry. Nisu v'huadin lezina. It's not just if she married Moshe, it's also if she was mezana with Moshe, she forbidden to this Reuven. I've already told Nisu why we say that she married him. It's a refined way of saying it. Chas negahat. Right? It just means that she was intimate with him. That's one version. Those say that the other way around. That no, the Gemara wants to say we said in the Mishnah Nisu she got married v'hoadin lezina. Nisu means just a nice way of saying it. But if she was with another man, which would mean even if she was mizana, this version is saying the same thing in the other way around. It's assuming that Nisu would mean the same thing as zina. Let's support Rav Nuna. Because Rav Nuna says, if you have this woman waiting for Yibum, which is really what this Rivka was retroactively, because Sarah really was not an erva because she was not her co-wife because she was in illness. asur liyavama, that she's forbidden to the yavam. No, nisu dafka. This that the Mishnah says she was married to Moshe was specific. Only then she's asur the yavam. Why is this? So this is what we were describing. The Gemara says that the michlafa be'isha, a little bit of a complicating case, because this will get confused with a woman that her husband went overseas. What does that refer to? Rashi explains. This husband went overseas, and people come and tell her, I'm sorry to tell you, but there was an accident, and your husband died. So she gets remarried. Turns out that really he was alive. He didn't die in the accident. So we say that it's forbidden for her to go back to him. Now, even though it was an einus, even though it was beyond their control because she thought he was dead, because maybe people are going to say, oh, this first guy must have divorced her because, look, she had married someone else and he's alive, must have been he divorced her. Now, if the first one's going to take her back after the second one divorces her, it's going to come out that he's taking back his gerusha, who had already married someone else, which that's the issa of machzik gerushusai. Now remarry your ex if she married someone else in between. Oh, so here also we're going to say the same thing. What? Maybe they're going to say that this Reuven had done chalitza because look, she got married with Moshe. So how could she go back to Reuven? That's the issa of chalutza. Because Rashi explains if she's only mizana with Moshe, the word doesn't get that. Not everyone knows about every Maisa's nos that's going on, right? And even if whoever finds out, it's going to know it's just the Peretz of Alma. No one's going to suspect to say, oh, she's being Mazana because Reuben gave her chalitza. No, because she's that type of woman, right? So if she goes back to Reuben, no one's going to say, oh, how could you take back your chalitza? No one's going to say it was chalitza. So therefore, says the Gemara, it might not support Rav Amnuna. The halacha of the Mishnah might have been only that she's aser tetzim mizeh because she married Moshe. Because of the similar case of Isha al-Qbaila bin Zayyam, that people are going to say that, oh, must have been that really you divorced or you give chalitza and now that you can't go back. But Bais knows. No one's saying anything, no one knows anything, whatever, you can go back, and therefore wouldn't be a problem. And therefore it's not necessarily a raya to the teaching of Rav Nuna. Now the Mishnah had said a similar type of a case of hakoines es yevim tebechul. Again, a very similar case that we said that when we find that the other woman is an ayilnis, the only difference was that this other woman wasn't an erva, and that's why it exempted Rivka the Tzara. She was just because Reuben did yibum with her. Then Reuben does yibum with her, and they find that, hey, your voice sounds different, your body seems different. Wait a second, let's go for testing. And you're an ayilnis. That means you were never married to my brother. So that means to say, wait, this Rivka who was the Tzara, she went and got married to this Moshe, she was a Shemeres Yavam. So the Mishnah says, okay, that's it. She has to leave both of them because you Shemeres Yavam, you had no right marrying someone else because the one I did yibum with, there was no yibum over here. This was never married to my brother. So the Gemara wonders, as one might have thought themselves, utzricha. Why do we need these two cases? They're very similar in the sense of that you have the woman, the other woman, as a meriftis, she was the islandess. So okay, either because she was the ervo or because she was the one that Yibum was done with, but it's the same idea. So they want no, we needed to say both cases. Why? Had we only said about the first case of the tzaras erva that she has to leave both husbands, because when the other woman, this Sarah, was an erva, so therefore this Sarah quickly runs to get married when her husband dies. When it's revealed that she was not tzaras erva, we're going to penalize her because she didn't wait. And she was. The problem is, no mitzvah yibum was happening because since there's an erva in one of the wives, no one's doing yibum. So if the yibum is not being fulfilled, you should have been concerned, saying, "I might have to fulfill the mitzvah yibum." Right. So that's right. So that we're gonna. When did we 5:35? You think if 20, right? When islandness, right? How do you test? How do you know what an islandness is, right? Right. We say by a sris, we say it's 35 or whatever. When do we assume that a person is not going to have children? Islandness really has some type of physical signs, right? It doesn't say exactly when, but she should have done her due diligence, right? And so al kapana we penalize her. But over here by the seifa, the kai mitzvah, meaning in the narrative that happened when this woman got married l'shuk, because her co-wife had done yibum. So I would say maybe she shouldn't have waited. We shouldn't penalize her because she thought the mitzvah was done. I mean, in the first case, no one's doing the mitzvah because you're tzaras erva. Okay, you should have been concerned. There's a mitzvah over here. Here, the mitzvah is being done. Why do I have to wait? So that's why you have to say the seifa. B'yashmin hacha, had we said over here in the seifa, I would say mishum dekodami kamei, because both of these women are falling initially for yibum as one to this Reuven. When one of them does yibum before she brings two pubic hairs, because again she's an islandess, so then the co-wife should have waited until to see that the yibum of her friend is kosher, because since she fell for yibum, she has to fulfill her zika with definitive yibum. Aval Hasan, but over there in the Reisha, when the tzaras erva, where in the beginning of the nefila of this tzara, she thought that actually the loyrami kamei, that there's no yibum here at all, because there's an erva that removes it from any zika. She shouldn't have entertained to say, I should wait to see maybe the erva is an islandess, because they're not in the parsha at all, so she's not even looking at it. So Imalai, I would say that we don't penalize her from yibum and from taking her gesuba because she was a nusa, and maybe she should be allowed to go back and remedy the situation. So I tell you, Tzrich had to say both cases, say that no, we're going to penalize her in both these cases. Now, the next case in the Mishnah was Kasav HaSefer V'tah. If the scribe wrote and he made a mistake, so they gave the get to the woman, gave the shever to the man, and then they gave the wrong things to each other. So the Tanakhama says, okay, that's it. You have to get divorced, you're released from both of them, and so on. But Rabbi Elazar, he said actually, he says, depends. If it's right away, if the mistake is discovered right after the divorce is invalid. Later point in time, there is a get. Says the Gemara discusses what's immediate and what's not. So what's considered immediate that it's not going to be a get? What's later on that it will be a get? So maybe the Mishmali says, as long as they're sitting and they're still engaged in the topic of the words of our divorce, that's immediate. I mean the Rabbunim are still there, so still tummeling, and he gave her and she gave him. That's immediate. They got up from the session. That's already considered after a later point in time, where again we're concerned that maybe they made this trick and he gave her and she gave him, and they're just whatever. Rabbi Abba gives a different interpretation. Says loinis is if she didn't get married yet, zela alta. Right, woman gets divorced, takes time to get remarried. That's considered immediate, and if they find out it's the wrong document, it's not going to be valid. Nisis, if she already got married to someone else, that's considered a later point in time. And then, like we said, the first one's not believed to now go ahead and ruin it for the second one, which actually the Gemara asks. The Gemara asks on Shmuel in the first interpretation. It says, now we're learning in the Mishnah that we said, why is it later on does Rebbe Elazar say that we're not, even though he's holding the get and she's holding the receipt, we're not going to invalidate it? Because it says the first guy, her ex, doesn't have the right to ruin it for the second one that she's married to right now. So we don't believe him, even though he's holding the get. Says according to the second interpretation about the Sheni. That makes sense why we're saying about a second guy, because he qualified and said that this whole halacha of lachazman is because of nisis, that you're married to someone else. So that's what we're saying, that's lachazman, that we don't believe the first one anymore, because we don't want to ruin it with the second guy. According to Shmuel, what's the second guy? There's no second guy. It's the moment they got up from the session. That's already lachazman. So I'm not ruining for a second guy. She's not married yet. So why are you saying that's the reason? So the Gitin Daf of Pei Aleph Mad Aleph says the Gemara, you're right. It means chutz haru'uya l'sheni, the rights that are fit for a second husband. Meaning, the moment that she leaves from in front of the witnesses, she already has a presumption that she's divorced. So there's another guy waiting to marry this geschickte Frau who's a Megreshes right now. That right that he would have in her, that's what I mean to say. The first guy doesn't have rights to cause a loss to the second guy. You're right, she's not married yet. It's just they just got up from the divorce. That's already considered that we don't believe him anymore because he might be making kanunya, and therefore it's not a difficulty on the interpretation of Shmuel. I can do any time.